Hello, and welcome to episode 6. I started doing some welding the last episode, so before I get into the other part, which is basically even more welding, I figured we should go over the importance of a welder, along with some of the safety equipment that I've been using. Welding's a lot of fun. The more you do it, the more you like it. The more you do it, the better you get at it. It's a little nerve-wracking at first, but it is something that after a while you do start enjoying. I was planning on teaching a lot of you how to start welding this year. Unfortunately enough, it looks like that's getting cut short, so I figured the next best thing would be showing you some welding. It wasn't my original plan to be welding my truck, it really wasn't, but it kind of kills two birds with one stone. I get done something I need to get done, and you guys can learn at least a little bit something. So for this episode, there's not going to be much work. Try not to fast forward, because there will be a test. I just want to go over the basics of the welder. So I'm just going to stick to the MIG welder for now. It's actually not my most favorite welder. We have the stick welder, which is more of a structural welder, I think. Personally, I just like stick welding better. There's TIG welding, which is an incredible type of welding, more of an art form. I do a little bit of that, and then of course we have the multi-purpose MIG welder. The reason why I'm not focused on the MIG welder is out of the others I just mentioned, if you have one at the shop, most likely this is going to be it. You may never do body work, but I guarantee you'll be welding an exhaust system on, or something of the sort. So I figured I would go over some stuff for the welder. I'll go over the helmet that I use. Real basics. If you're welding above or underneath the car, try to wear a hat. They actually sell little beanies that go on your head. Always make sure that you are at least covered all the way, because welding will cause a burn, sunburn, by the way. It's not to mention multiple burns, so it's not a very good idea to wear a short sleeve just for that. You should wear a welding jacket. I don't have one here. But that is something you should definitely have on top of you. You should always wear at least a helmet. I prefer to wear a mask underneath. There is a lot of gases that come out of that, and well, no one ever knows what the gases are, because it also depends on what you're welding. MIG welders are very picky on, they like close contact and they like clean metal. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind before you start welding, is making sure that your surface is completely clean, or as clean as possibly can be. So we'll start off with, first, this is the negative. Always put this on the piece of metal that you're working on. It doesn't have to be directly next to it, but if I'm welding the body of a car, I probably shouldn't put this on the frame, because there is rubber mounts in between, so it wouldn't get the best contact. I guarantee it will get contact, because there are ground straps between the two, but the closer the better. This is your gun that you actually weld with. So you have the trigger here. You have the actual cable which carries the gas. It carries the wire. You have your nozzle. If I can take off my nozzle here. Different nozzles come off different ways. Some unscrew, apparently, like this one does. Some just slip off. So right here you have your contact tip and your gas diffuser. Let me see if I can get a little closer. So here's your contact tip. Alright, and here's your gas diffuser. So the contact tip, as you can tell, I can loosen this up. And I can tighten it up. These tips are changeable. Okay? And depending on the type of wire, which is the wires right here, the type of wire that you put through, you have to change this, and I'm not going to get into it right now, but if you take this diffuser off, there's a cable that goes all the way in here that runs all the way to the machine. That cable has to be changed along with this. The wire that I'm using right now is 0.25, I believe. They do range depending on manufacturer of machine. Usually it's 0.25, 0.30, 0.35, 0.45. There are some probably in between. So once again, screws back on. This is actually takes your gas and diffuses it so it's not surrounded by air. If air gets in your weld, that's when it becomes porous and has holes. If you can look in here, that's your little slack that actually you can break off. You clean that once in a while, it can actually get filled up to the point where the gas can't come through. So once again, trigger, handle. If we come over here to the actual machine, I'll go through a little bit of the machine with you. This is the front of the welder. We have the obvious on-off switch. The welder is a 30 to 155 range. Sorry, it's a little dirty. You have 130 amps, 30% duty cycle, 20 volts. The 30% duty cycle basically means, rough estimates, if you were welding for an hour, you could weld straight for around 20 minutes in that hour before the unit gets too hot and needs to cool down. It is a 220 unit or 230 volts. You can buy 110 welders. I usually like using the 220 units. They are a little bit more efficient. This is a Lincoln Weld Pack 155. It might be a little on the old side now, I'm not sure. This is your heat setting for how much electricity or heat goes into the weld, and this is your wire speed, how fast the wire's coming out of the front of the gun. These are both adjustable. There's inside the welder, it gives you basics of where you're supposed to start off. I'll show you that in a minute. As you start welding, you're going to notice that those aren't always completely accurate. They give a good place to start, and then you might have to turn the dial here or there to really get a precision weld. You're going to have to adjust up and down a little, but it is a good starting point that it will give you. So that's the front of it. There's really not much to it. The one that we have at school has all gauges over it. It's all digital, but pretty much it does the exact same thing. So this is your tank of gas that's in the back. In this instance, as you can tell, it is an argon carbon dioxide mix. They do have different welding gases. There's complete carbon dioxide mix. There's other mixes if you're doing different types of metals. This is my regulator. It's a very basic regulator. It has a predetermined one out coming out of the nozzle. So that is just telling me how much gas is left in the tank. It is not telling me how much is coming out of the nozzle. Alright, so the nozzle is predetermined and it locks it into place by Lincoln. Besides that, it's a 220 machine, so there's my 220 outlet, and the tanks come in different sizes. So it's usually hooked up to the back of the machine and strapped in, as you can tell. So on to the inside. Now that we explained the basics on the outside of the welder, let's get into a little bit of the settings for welding. As you can see, they're going to differ a little between welders, but you'll get the basic idea. one thing that you guys are going to have to get used to, and I will get the little gauge to help you, is steel thicknesses. Okay, it's very important. So you have the 24 gauge thickness all the way up to a 5/16 thickness. Now, when I was talking earlier about that replacement panel being junk, it was probably a 24 gauge panel. The one that I put on there is probably around a 20, maybe a 22, or somewhere in between. And that will basically show you the difference of the thickness just by looking at it. Alright, so what does that mean? If you remember when I was showing you the heat ranges and the speed of the wire gauges on the front of the welder, you'll notice in this they have all different settings. But why is it A 1.5 over here, but in a 25 it's A2? Okay, well, that depends on the type of wire that you're actually using too. Right here is a gasless flux core. That means inside of the wire there's actually flux. That's usually on the outside of the wire if you're using an arc welder, which would be the easiest way to explain that. But that's for windy conditions, thicker metal and stuff and so on, because as you can tell, if you're using a .40 metal, I mean a .045 wire, you can weld up to a 5/16. I don't recommend this welder doing that, but it can manage to do it. But at the same time, if you're using a .03 wire with gas, notice the E at 7.5 speed can only weld a 10 gauge. So this is a very good chart to tell you what the welder can do, where to set the welder to start. It does not mean you're not going to tweak it a little here and there. You might slow the wire down a little bit. You might turn it a little hotter, depending on when you butt it together, if you're putting one on top of the other. But basically, the things you need to know is the type of wire, which once again, as I said before, ranges from .025 all the way up to .045. Now there's a gasless flux core, and then there's the solid, which you actually need to use gas. And it will tell you the type of gas. So you can either use CO2 on the machine, or you can use an argon CO2 mix. As we looked before, I have the argon CO2 mix. So in the settings that I use when I was welding, for the most part, I'm going to be in between here. It's most likely going to be A2. It might be a little faster, a little slower, but most likely the heat range is going to stay in the A. If you look a little bit lower, it's going to tell you that you need to reverse the polarity if you're using gasless compared to MIG. That's the wires that I'll show you after I leave this, along with the setups. But when you're changing the wire, you need to change the wheel that actually pushes the wire through the cable. So here's the actual drive roller wheel and the orientation with the type of wire. So you'll read right here, and each one tells you where to place it with the type of wire you're using. So I will show you that down there. That's where you have the spool of wire that actually brings it through the hose. Pretty much that's it. Things you should probably know for the test would be pretty much sizes and types of wires, types of gas. I won't really touch on reversing your polarity too much, and I probably will not do anything with orientation of the wheel. Alright, so thicknesses of metal, you should know that. In fact, if you have some time to Google that for other purposes until we get back into the shop where I can show you, that would be great. But pretty much this is an accurate measurement. Alright, so size of my finger, it's an accurate measurement of the size. Okay? So from there we're going to go inside the welder, and then we'll get back to explaining helmets and masks. This is inside the welder. Now, if you remember, I was just talking about by changing the polarity of the wires. That is these two wires right here. In the diagram, you actually swap these depending on if you're doing MIG or if you're doing core flux welding. This right here is that drive wheel orientation that I was talking about. This is the tension for it. You actually slide this down, this flips up. You put your MIG wire in, this is just held into place. Pretty much that's it. You have this screw right here, you unscrew this, the whole unit comes out the front. This right here, those little heads for the gun that I was talking about, I just leave them in there so I always know where they are. This is my fuse, so if I do blow a circuit, that's the first place I do check if it gets overheated. I usually do not overheat this unit. So, and this is your wire. This is solid core. This is the 0.025, I believe. So there you go. And different welders do have different wires, and different welders do use different size reels. We also have, say like this, which is a lot bigger. It's just more of it. It is actually, if you look, the diagram, the wire is a 0.023. So, like I said before, it depends on where you buy it from and everything like that. If I'm not mistaken, here is a 0.035 wire. As you can tell, it looks a little thicker. You usually stock up on different wires. So, but that is the inside of a welder. Anything for the test that would need there, different types of spools. I can put the bigger one on this. Usually it handles the smaller one better. It doesn't bind up as much. So now that we're done with the welder, the few other things. One, the gloves I wear. Leather type of gloves. These are actually a little lighter because they're made for MIG welding. Arc welding gloves are usually a little bit thicker, but just a good type of leather gloves. No leather gloves. Those mechanic type of gloves aren't even really that good. I will admit, I do use those once in a while. It depends on how heavy the welding you're doing and stuff like that. For little sheet metal welding, if you're welding a motorcycle together, there's other ones. You might get burnt a little, but they're not bad. But if you start doing real welding, real grinding, a good set of leather gloves is definitely the way to go. Which brings me to the mask. This is good because this one fits under the helmet, which is hard for a lot of masks to actually do. It does a good job. It keeps most of the stuff out. I actually like the color pink due to the fact that I know when these are dirty, and these get quite disgusting. Over here it isn't that bad, but I've been inside buckets, I've been inside dump trucks, I've been inside sanders, and welding all that stuff and grinding, and the airflow isn't very good. So these take a lot of stuff. So this is a very good idea. Safety glasses. We all know about safety glasses. So I'm not going to go over those. Use them. Which brings me to my welding helmet. We've all seen me using this for grinding, welding. This is like an all-in-one. It has all sorts of different settings in here. See if I can get somewhat close so you can see some of them. There we go. So it has all settings for lighter, darker, short and long periods type of lenses. It has a mode button which would give you, which is an X mode, which is basically used for outside. It just starts the darkening thing a little different. Your usual welding shield, your number 10, that's usually what you start out. That's how dark this gets, it goes up to, I believe this one goes up to 14. Start out in 10. If it's still too bright for you, step it up. Don't go any lower than 10 when you're welding. That's really bad. Also, strangely enough, don't look at the sun with one of these. It doesn't work. The delay, that's for the delay of the dark coming back to the light, because this one you can always see through. It's not for how fast it gets dark. Sensitivity, that's more of how fast it gets dark, not really. It's how sensitive it is to light. So if I had this number really high and I tried to go weld outside in a sunny day, the helmet would always be dark. So that sensitivity you have to fool with, that's more for ambient lighting compared to when you strike the arc. So what else? We have a cut mode, which is for a torch. Oxygen acetylene torch. This is pretty much the lowest it goes. It goes up to 8 in this setting. It's a good idea. I know we've all used a torch and you walk away and your eyes have like yellow dots in them. Still not a good thing. Should definitely be wearing some sort of protection, at least those green goggles or something like this. I like something like this because it also blocks my face all the time. And there's the grinding mode, and that was the mode I was using for a lot of it. Alright, so this mask also, the more expensive the mask, I don't know if you can see, there's a dot here, here, and here. These are the sensors for it actually at dark. The more of those sensors, the better off you are. Cheap helmets will usually have 1 or 2, and then they go on from there. Alright, so try to remember, a good helmet is probably the best investment you can do if you're going to do some welding. Eye damage is not a good thing. And the other thing is to never look at someone welding. Okay, arc flash, weld flash, whatever you want to call it, it's when you're actually looking into a weld without eye protection, is going to burn the cornea of your eyes. To the extent of damage that you do, I'm not sure. They'll tell you you'll get welder's burn, which actually, from what I heard, feels like dumping sand in your eyeball. To this day, I've never had that done, usually because I'm the one welding, not the one looking. I heard it's extremely painful, so I wouldn't recommend it. I'm not sure the permanent amount of damage that you can do. From what I hear, it's blindness, so let's try not to do that. And that's pretty much about it. I will go into much more detail when we get back to school, but I figured the basic lessons of how to use a MIG welder, I think, is something I should have went over. So I know this isn't the most exciting episode that we've had, but I do think it's something that you need to know about and need to learn. So I'm sure once in a while I'll stop and we can go over some other tools as we're going through this process. So now that the basics are finished, I figure we could get back to putting my rocker panel on.